shadowy apparitions, all gods-infused minions of insanity are what's brewing for Shadow Priest in Dragonflight. If the talent tree wasn't so messed up that I need to go to therapy again, Jesus Christ. I'm going crazy right now. So this is what it means to feel like a real Shadow Priest in real life by trying to build one in Dragonflight Alpha. Listen, we've been putting it aside for way too long. We've been expecting and hoping for new things to be added, but it's about time that we take a look at Shadow Priest with all the glory and all the not glory that it has going for it in Shadowlands. Obviously, this is still alpha. Things are going to change and we will go into the details further on. But first, if you like the content that we do and you want to see us do it live, play the alphas, raid the raids, and Mythic Plus the Mythic Plus dungeons with you lovely folk, then check our stream on twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline, where we stream anywhere from 4 to 5 days a week. The schedule will be there posted on our channel and you can check it out, and you'll be able to chat directly with us. We can talk about anything in WoW, almost anything. I still don't know what's going on in Goldshire, and get your questions answered, talk about specs, and just have general fun and play WoW together if you are on the EU servers. So check out twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline, leave a follow, maybe a prime, who knows, and you'll be obviously supporting the channel and get a feel of what it's like to play WoW in things that will be going into videos. Now let's actually go into Shadow Priest before I lose my mind and talk about things while I still have my sanity. First things first, since this is our first priest video, we will be slightly talking about the general talent tree, but mostly what would probably be of interest to Shadow Priest. And oh boy, do I feel cucked by actually wanting to play Shadow and going into the general talent tree. So overall, first of all, if you really look at the way that the things are spread, you'll be able to tell that the right-hand side of the tree is very heavy on shadow spells and abilities and passives and stuff like that, while the left-hand side is very heavy on holy, and middle is probably where discipline would be, because discipline is supposed to be, from a fantasy perspective, a combination of the two specs. Not a problem with that, except with the fact that the majority of Shadow's kit is here, and you would say, well, some with Holy Priest and so on and so forth, maybe, but the thing is, since the game is basically designed in a way where damage solves the problem, healers and tanks are usually there to support the DPSers to stay alive so that they can do the most amount of damage, hence why when content gets harder, tanks and healers usually pick up the slack and do some damage of their own, which is a great choice that they have. The DPSers do not have that choice, so normally this wouldn't be a problem having Shadow-specific core mechanics into the Shadow tree if they could be a choice and if you could choose between some of them and not. But if you're going to be playing a DPS where throughput is important, you will want to pick all of the throughput talents. And if you've watched any of our previous videos on any other DPS spec, you'll notice that there will be some talent nodes that will have some throughputs, and that's not that bad, okay? Well, you can take the ideal DPS specs like Enhancement and Elemental, where they have like almost no throughput throughout the entire general talent tree, which is amazing because you can just pick the tools and utility and cooldowns that you want to help your group. Not all classes have the same, and Shadow Priest is one of the specs that seems to be as opposite to that mindset as possible, which makes it so weird and so... Alright. Okay, first of all, first and foremost, you will start with Shadow Word Death as a default, not too shabby, and obviously you'll want the upgrade just underneath it. You will probably still want to take Shadow Mend, mostly because it unlocks further points down the talent tree, although not necessarily important. You can definitely skip it if you want. However, as a hybrid DPS spec, you'll probably really want Shadow Mend, specifically since you might take some damage, and throwing in a quick heal that does not eat up your DPS resource could be very useful and has been in the past. You will also be able to unlock Dispel Magic if you don't want to go the Shadow Mend route, but Dispel Magic will further unlock the tree, opposite to Mind Restrain, which Dude, I mean, you can avoid taking stuff like Mind Restraint and just going because you want Twist of Fate. That is the big throughput node, and you can get it through Dispel Magic, which is okay. And you can continue going down the downwards path, but you will still want Dispel Magic because just underneath it is Improved Mind Blast, which is a throughput, making again Dispel Magic not a choice since you will want Improved Mind Blast as a Shadow Priest. Not to mention that Dispel Magic opens up the way to Power Infusion, and if you don't take Power Infusion with Dispel Magic, you'll have to go into the holy side of the talent tree, which normally would have been cool if you want a little bit more healing, but you're actually sacking a lot of potential damage by doing so, since you will still want Twist of Fate and Improve Mind Blast, and you will see that you don't have enough points to go the holy healing route to unlock Power Infusion because you will want Power Infusion. Power Infusion obviously has been a contentious spell all throughout the last expansion, and it's looking like it's gonna be the same in Dragonflight because it's a very, very powerful cooldown that you can cast on anybody else, so that obviously raises the questions, well, do you want to have fun and cast it on yourself, or do you want the group to perform? And having to choose between these two feels a little bit icky sometimes, and sometimes you might even be forced to make a choice that you do not particularly want to make. However, let's say that can be bypassed if you keep going down Power Infusion, because you will keep going down Power Infusion to unlock Twins of the Sun Priestess by taking stuff like Mass Dispel and Angel's Mercy, which you might not want. They're not necessary for your throughput, they're utility and defensive cooldowns. They're good, but do you want them? Maybe don't, maybe not, but you will want Twins, so you will have to get them, making those two also not actual choices, but mandatory points, kind of reducing the freedom of building the priest that you would want. Not to mention that even more not choices go downwards from Twist of the Sun Priestess all the way to Mind Games. Whether or not you want the two previous talents to Mind Games is irrelevant because you will want Mind Games, since Mind Games is the only other throughput DPS capstone that is relevant for your spec, and you will want it if it remains in this iteration where it does a lot of damage for a 45-second cooldown, and that it has been particularly pretty good for the entire expansion of Shadowlands. You have so far from Dispel Magic, counting Dispel Magic, which is not a choice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 talent nodes that are mandatory, with a couple of them having multiple points that you need to put in. Not to mention all the other shadow stuff, because you could say that this might be a little bit hybrid, a little bit disciplined stuff since it's in the middle of the tree. And all of the other shadow stuff on the far right of the talent tree is also mandatory because you will want the bottom capstone, which is Shadow Flame Prism, with all the fuel talents that goes into it from the Shadow Fiend. And it's currently a mechanical legendary that's being played right now in Shadowlands, and although it's a fun concept, it impacts the rotation in such a negative way in my opinion personally, and it seems like it resonates with a lot of Shadow Priests out there, that it feels more like a pain, and it's a pain that you will have to endure because Shadow Flame Prism is a lot of damage, so you don't, again, have a choice. So on top of all the mandatory utility that you get, there are only 3 points for non-throughput that you will still have to unlock to enable the next gate so you can get the capsules that you want. So for instance, you will want to put points into Mind Restraint and Taming the Shadows. If you don't put them into those, you'll probably put them into some holy healing talent trees, but you will have to spend them because there's no other option to unlock the further talent tree. So you have essentially 29 total points out of 31 that will be necessary, creating a mandatory cookie cutter build with almost no options. This is very bad in terms of viability and versatility and creating a sea of options like we have for other specs. Obviously, it can be done. This was one of the earlier talent trees, so obviously we'll need a lot of work. We haven't seen anything so far for it, so this is basically our opportunity to point out some of our newbie average Shadow Priest opinions about it. But even if we're wrong or not, the way it feels as a new player going to, you're like, okay, well, I have to take all of these because if I don't, I'll just do less damage. Do you want to do less damage just to have some cool heals? Go for it, my man. But you're gonna be one of the only specs hybrid in the game that will have to sacrifice this. Obviously, a solution would be to reduce the amount of damage talents that you have so that you have a lot more points to spend into other stuff that are not obligatory. That would probably be one of the main ideas to fix this, but I'm sure that the devs that are working on it are already looking into solutions. So we'll see exactly what happens, if anything happens, in the coming weeks or months. Now let's actually go into the spec talent tree before I actually go see my mom, because I haven't seen her in 3 months since I started recording this video. As always, the top of the talent trees just unlocks your bare core part of the spec with a lot of abilities, and passives that work into Shadow. You'll recognize, I think, pretty much all of the talents that you have now in Shadowlands, passives that you have in your spellbook, pretty much all of them. I don't think there's one that's missing. And here, there's 1 or 2 that have changed, and we will go into that, but like a quick overview of it, you're gonna have a lot of abilities to press, a lot of insanity generation, which is probably something related to tuning, is probably related to the build that we're getting, but compounding all of this with Shadow Flame Prism makes the rotation very, very heavy. And so far, what I've been able to test in the Dragonflight dungeons with Marcelian and Lego was that I just had so much insanity. You will notice a lot of times here, obviously it goes into, you know, optimization of the spec, but a lot of times here I'm capping insanity so much, and while I have insanity capped, I have a lot of abilities and cooldowns that I need to press before actually consuming insanity. So there's a question, is it important to spend that devouring plague to consume the insanity before popping all the 10 cooldowns that I need to press, or do I pop them before and just stay capped on insanity and waste all the future insanity that I would generate over the course of the combat? That is one of the issues that I feel as the spec has that could be addressed compared to other specs that, you know, rely heavily on resource generation that do not have this particular issue. And although it's nice to have a more difficult spec that you need to optimize, being this far away from everybody else just feels that it's a little bit disconnected from the game design as a whole. Now, first thing that you might notice is that Vampiric Insight, which is like close to the first gate of the talent tree, is particularly where the talent tree actually starts, because everything that goes into the bottom side of the talent tree comes from this one point. So pretty much anything that you take to the left and to the right of it are essentially utility spells, which is actually maybe the only positive about this, or at least the only big positive about this, is that you're not forced into stuff like Vampiric Embrace or Intangibility or Dispersion or things like that. You're not forced into those, which is good, because then you can choose to get them, but if you had double the amount of talent points, maybe that would have been a reality, but let's see how that will realistically play out. First of all, before we actually go to the bottom of the sub-talent tree, you will notice that Searing Nightmare is still a choice node just above Vampiric Insight. And I mean, this has been a contentious topic, or a controversial topic at the very least, with the community, because as a concept, it's cool. You kind of want some AoE Insanity Spender, or to translate that insanity into AoE damage, and you don't really have anything like that. You don't have anything like that outside of Searing Nightmare, since right now the only insanity consumers are Devouring Plague. That's it. Did I say plural? Did I say consumers and I mean consumer? Whatever, I'm crazy. I'm doing a video on Shadow Priest, it's fine. But hear me out. This is the same issue that initially Frost Decays had, that they're forced to talent into Glacial Advance or Breath of Sindragosa now, which that has been fixed for Dragonflight, by the way. You can get those. And for instance, Boomkin has a similar issue where the resource that it generates can hardly convert into AoE efficiency. You can cast Starfall, but it's cooldown capped, especially if you go the Starfall route. So we need to stop having these DPS specs where the resource that they generate becomes useless, or like next to useless in AoE, or that you're forced into a specific option to transfer or translate that resource into AoE damage, making, again, that option not really a choice, because what other option do you have to do AoE? Sure, you can pick Misery instead of Searing Nightmare, but that still doesn't help you spend insanity in AoE. And maybe this concept, all the massive insanity generation and the only one insanity spender, would be solved if, let's say, Void Eruption would go back to an older version of a Void form, where your insanity is basically depleted each second and you gain more damage the longer you stay in Void form, which would make a lot more sense with the plethora of insanity generation mechanics that you have right now and the very lack thereof of actual spenders. Let's also mention really quick that Vampiric Insight is basically a redesigned Dark Thought that we have now, kinda, where right now you can get the instant procs of Mind Blast through damage over time effects, not just channeling Mind Flame, Mind Shear. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything specific, but you can get up to a total of 3. I think I had 3 total charges of Mind Blast at one point in the alpha, which was kind of cool. I don't know if I had 4. I don't know if that was a bug or if it's intended to keep adding these charges. It was pretty cool, but it was also very difficult to consume all of those charges, and we get into more issues. Specifically, the issues with Searing Nightmare that makes the rotation AoE be a pain, and this is also basically influenced by Shadow Flame Prison. So first of all, the reason why Searing Nightmare is also so annoying and why the AoE rotation of Shadow is so annoying is because there's way too much to manage. First of all, you have the Mind Games ability that you need to cast from the General Talent tree. You have the Mind Bender with all the mechanics from Shadow Flame Prison that will take priority over a lot of abilities and resource management. You'll have Void Eruption as a cooldown to also bake into this that will add Void Bolt as an ability to cast on top of all the rotational abilities that you have. And if you even talent into Surrender of Madness, you will have 2 Void forms, and if you do go AoE, you might get this because Hungering Void again has very little AoE applications. But if you even take Hungering Void, then will you use the value of Void Bolts increased by Hungering Void in AoE just to keep this talent relevant and have value from it, or does it just lose value like it kind of does right now in heavy AoE fights and becomes kind of like a dead talent or a talent only for bosses or very small pools? So this is just a lot of madness. And again, Ancient Madness, which is further down below Certain Madness and Hungering Void, which gives crit like before, and this is maybe a wasted opportunity because it could actually augment one of the previous talents to make them not feel useless in specific AoE encounters, or vice versa in single target. Maybe it could augment Hungering Void in a way where Void Bolt could cleave, and maybe it could be a choice node with the cleave option and the increased crit option if you do decide to take something like Surrendered Madness or just play Hungering Void in a single target. Also, on top of all of this, you need to maintain Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch on AoE as much as possible, right? And you also need to consume the free procs of Mind Blast, which can go all the way up to 3 or 4 right now on Alpha. And you will definitely talent into Shadow Crash because it enables the AoE part of the capstones in the bottom talent tree. So you'll have Shadow Crash, which is not only an extra button, not only AoE damage, but it's also insanity generation. And you'll have Sanguine Teachings, which keeps going to the bottom left capstone, which you need to maintain if you want. If this is relevant enough damage, you will want to maintain also Shadow War Shield on you to have an absorb if you don't have a healer that can do this for you, so that you can have more damage output, unless this you just ignore this and then it just becomes a dead talent, at which point why bother even having this in the talent tree, because you will want this to go to Idol of N'Zoth, which is likely going to be BIS for AoE. It's the kind of old Echoing Void type mechanic of the corruptions in 8.3, although it's not really, it does AoE damage, it pulsates AoE damage, and each target in AoE pulsates that damage, so it can compound into a lot of AoE damage at the end. And the playstyle will become just very heavy on the maintenance, and you're required with way too many cooldowns and setups to make it feel like you're using your toolkit and you're getting efficiency out of your spec. So maybe one issue with making Searing Nightmare be not as annoying is to maybe make it consume your entire insanity bar and do damage scaled accordingly to the amount of resource that you've spent, while also, you know, doing all the Shadow Word Pain things that it likes to do. So maybe that can be good, because that would also reduce the amount of globals that you need to spend, which is particularly annoying considering how many you have. And this is just from my personal perspective from playing Shadow Priest, a couple of patches into Shadowlands and also in Dragonflight right now, and seeing that the playstyles are actually pretty similar between the two expansions, with maybe even more things to do now in Dragonflight. Alright, let's talk about the capstones, since there are a lot of talents that are particularly good, but what you'll probably want are the capstones, which are actually really interesting, and building on towards the capstones are a lot of talents that, you know, kind of worked towards this. And I talked a little bit about Idol of N'Zoth, which makes the Echoing Void AoE mechanic that blasts stuff, you know, damage dealt by Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Devouring Plague has a 20% chance to apply Echoing Void. Each time Echoing Void is applied, it has a chance to collapse, dealing shadow damage to all nearby enemies until no stacks remain. So it's similar to the old Corruption. It's really good, and obviously you'll want to take most advantage of it by putting out dots, which is again a lot of maintenance to do, but there it is. There's also Idol of Yasharaj, which is probably one of the more interesting ones because essentially it says Shadow Fiend causes you to gain a benefit based on a target's emotional state. Now, how the game sees this classification of emotional state is basically what HP the target is at. Is it enraged? Does it have a buff or a debuff? Stuff like this. There is a list that Blizzard will release, and I think they mentioned that they will make the tooltip a little more informative to let you know what that means, but you'll get a sort of buffs. Most likely you will adjust your rotation, if at all, to the type of buff that you will receive when you press Shadow Fiend, which is also a little bit weird because this is the only talent that affects Shadow Fiend and Mindbender, and no other talent in the spec tree does that, so that will make all the Shadow Fiend and Mindbender talents in the general talent tree even more mandatory if you do decide to take this capstone. Alright, well, we also have Void Apparitions to the right, which is not one of the old gaudy Steels type capstones, but it does complete the Shadowy Apparitions build, which has been pretty cool in BFA as well, and it has become a core of Shadow for a long time. And you do have a lot of talents that go into it. First of all, Void Apparitions and Shadowy Apparitions, which unlocks the whole thing. Then you have Auspicious Spirits, Unleash the Shadows, Idol of Yogg-Saron, which, God fuck, this is the other Shadowy Apparitions sound, that's capstone that's all the way to the fucking right side, and you cannot get it. There is no way with this current talent point to get that and Void Apparitions as well with the Shadowy Apparitions talents, and at which point you're like, why the fuck? Why is this working with the build but I cannot get it? This is so infuriating because the Idol of Yogg-Saron is actually really cool, but you cannot get it with the Shadowy Apparitions build. And why wouldn't you? Because it would be influenced by all the Shadowy Apparitions and extra procs and everything, because it does fuel it, and it just feels infuriating. Maybe it could be replaced with one of the ones on the left, which is Idolic Intuition. And if you do that, you can get it, and that would be way better because you wouldn't have to put 3 points into its prerequisite instead of putting the 2 points into Wrath and Wither, for instance. God damn it. And also in the middle of the capstone list, you have Living Shadow, which works slightly different from the tier set. It looks the same, it's procced the same, but it also, it instead replicates the spells that you cast for, I think, 10 seconds. So that's more interesting than the tier set because it might actually influence your priority, because in those 10 seconds, maybe you want to cast the most impactful spells that can be duplicated. So that's particularly really cool. And I couldn't honestly tell if it replicates the Insanity Generation. If it does, then it's even crazier. And if it doesn't, then that means, you know, casting Insanity Generation spells are a little bit useless for the Insanity Generation. But I digress. And it works really well with the Idolic Intuition, or Idolic Intuition, however you pronounce it. And even if Idolic is replaced with Yogg-Saron, they change places, you can still take Living Shadow and Idolic Intuition and have the mechanics work together without sacrificing any consistency or becoming a little bit too overpowered because everything's too much accessible. So that solution can work for everybody. And before we get to the last point, Idol of Cthulhu, just one last thought on Idol of Yogg-Saron, which is a choice note with Idol of Cthulhu. The concept is really cool, it's amazing. It adds a pet, which is a void thing, beast stuff that's so cool to look at. It's so big, it's so nice. I hope they keep it this way. This is my personal favorite out of the entire talent tree. It's a single target, shadow bolty thing shooting dude that does very little damage right now, but that can be altered with tuning. It's a shame that it doesn't really work with the Puppet Master talent from the general talent tree, since it's kind of a missed opportunity. It could work, it would make sense, and it would give a little bit more value to Puppet Master, but then again, kind of contradict myself from earlier saying that there's way too many mandatory talents from the general talent tree, so who knows? And speaking of Idol of Cthulhu, this is, I believe, it's a legendary right now in Shadowlands. You spawn tendrils that just like shoot things. It's also single target focused. I believe we had a corruption 8.3 like this as well, void tendrils or something like that, that, you know, you spawn a little tentacle thing that buzzes the target. So it's not necessarily something new, but it is cool, and if people liked it, then you can take it again, which is really cool. Conclusions. God damn it. Right, where do I begin? Jesus. So first of all, on a more positive note, as always, the Shadow design spec is so heavy on the fantasy. It's so fucking cool with the Old God and Insanity and all that kind of stuff. It's just so annoyingly implemented, and I can chalk this off of the fact that this was one of the first ones that they did. So there were a lot more better iterated talent trees that were released after pre. So I'm hoping that they take a lot of feedback and a lot of inspiration from the other talent trees, like Shaman, for instance, and make the general class and the spec class a lot less annoying. Cause Jesus fucking Christ, man. Yeah, a little bit too many mandatory talents in the general talent tree, and again, Yashraj being the only one that works with Shadow Fiend is really weird since all the Shadow Fiend talents are in the general tree, so it kind of feels like you cannot have one without the other, otherwise it's just really silly. So again, it takes away from, you know, that freedom of building stuff, which you don't see in a lot of other specs. The talent tree just needs a lot more work. I get the concept. The fantasy is amazing. The creativity that the devs put into this talent tree, or the dev, I don't know how many people work on Shadow, is amazing, man. Like, I get it, the fantasy. I'm in love with it, but god damn it, I am actually going insane trying to build a Shadow Priest right now on Alpha. So, what do you guys think? Do you want to go through the hassle? Is this deliberate, by the way, to make the talent tree so infuriating that you're losing your mind trying to build your Shadow so you can actually experience the playstyle of the spec in real life? Is it enough? I think the Shadow talent trees have a lot of potential. It's really cool. The spells aren't there. The cooldowns are awesome. The capstones are amazing. I really hope they keep them and they rework or redesign a lot of the points and give us the Shadow that we've been waiting for. Thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Once again, go to twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline if you want to see us stream and talk and play with us directly. Leave a follow. We would super appreciate it. Thank you, dear patrons, for supporting the content. Every video that we do on a daily basis. You guys rock. Our Patreon link is down below if you want to support the channel. Thank you, and see you next time. Love y'all. Bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.